Hello students, I welcome you to a lecture on Samuel Johnson's poem London, a poem in imitation of the third satire of Juvenal. We are going to start the text. So I want you all to have a copy, a printed copy of the text in front of you while we are doing this so that you are able to annotate whatever needs to be marked. So let's begin. This particular poem, London, a poem in imitation of the third satire of Juvenal, was written by Samuel Johnson. And this particular poem is in the form of a satire inspired from a classical satirist called as Juvenal. And in Juvenal's work, The Third Satire, there was a man called as Ambrosius who was leaving Rome in order to live in Cumae. And why was he doing that? He was doing that because he wanted to escape from the vices and dangers of the capital city that Rome had turned into. In a very similar vein, we find a character by the name of Thales in this poem of Samuel Johnson. And Thales decides to travel to Cambria or Wales in order to escape from the problems of London. What were the problems of London? It was crime, corruption, squalor. The city of London was degenerating and it had become very similar to the city of Rome that Ambrosius was trying to leave. So, just like Ambrosius was trying to escape from Rome, Thales over here is trying to escape from London. Now, Thales himself has been inspired from a person called as Sir Richard Savage, who was a friend of Johnson and who left London to travel to Wales. The poem London opens with an epigraph, which you can see, and it has been written by Juvenal. And when we translate the epigraph, the first two lines, or the first two lines, which are a direct quote from Juvenal, it translates to who can endure this monstrous city? Who is so iron willed he can bear it? So, just like Juvenal in his work made or talked about Ambrosius leaving the city of Rome, we have Thalassovia who wants to leave the city of London. So the epigraph states, who can endure this monstrous city? Which city are we talking about in this particular poem? We are talking about the city of London, which has degenerated. It is full of vices and corruption and ill practices of the government, too much of violence. We had discussed the various reasons because of which Johnson had decided to write this poem, London, um, because of Sir Robert Walpole and the various policies that he had come up with, which only increased the divide between the rich and the poor, and other reasons which we have already discussed. So, when he talks about the city being a monstrous city, he's referring to London, which has turned into one. The further explanation or translation of the epigraph was, who is so iron willed he can bear it? There is no person who has the will or who has the desire to bear uh, the way in which London had transformed. It was not a nice place to live in anymore, and that is why Thales is trying to run away from it. It was a direct attack on the government and the king as well as Robert Walpole for all the laws that they were passing and all the censorship that was happening on writers. So here we find that Thales is waiting on the banks of a river which flows through London, and that is the river Thames. And Thales was waiting on that bank for a boat. The poem opens, and the poet says, though grief and fondness in my breast rebel, when injured Thales bids the town farewell. So he says that there is grief in his heart And there was a lot of fondness for this person, Thales, and it pained to actually see Thales leave, waiting on the bank of River Thames, waiting for a boat. When injured, Thales, injured not in a physical manner, he was not hurt in any way on the surface, but the situation of London affected him a lot. And Thales was standing on the bank of River Thames in order to bid the town farewell, in order to say goodbye, in order to move away from London. The poet continues and says, "Yet still my calmer thoughts his choice commend." So the poet says that he is full of grief because his friend Thales is leaving the town. He's bidding the town farewell. But when he thinks calmly, he says that he respects his friend's choice. He is sorrowful, but the choice that Thales has made, he respects his choice. I praise the hermit, but regret the friend. He says that he is going to miss his friend. He is appreciative of Thales taking a stand. He praises the hermit. Hermit is referring to Thales, but he regrets losing his friend. What is going to happen? Who now resolves from Wise and London far? So Thales is ready to leave to some place in rural Wales or Cambria, and he wanted to get peace of mind. He wanted solitude from himself. He wanted to run away from Wise and London. He wanted to go far away from it. To breathe in distant lands a purer air. He is moving from an urban landscape, that is London, into a rural part of the country. He wants to breathe in distant fields. He wants solitude in his life. He wants a purer air, purer than what he is breathing in the city, which is choking him. And fixed on Cambria's solitary shore. So, this is where he's going to. He has decided to go to Cambria, and he is happy to move there. Give to Saint David one true Britain more. Saint David actually refers to the place called as Wales. So basically, what the poet is trying to say is that he is adding one more Briton, referring to a British person, to that particular place of Wales or Cambria. So, what do we learn from this? Thales was waiting on the banks of River Thames. He's moving from London to a place called as Cambria because he was actually fed up of the vices and corruption that was present in the city of London. Why was there vice and corruption? Why had these things crept up into the city? Because of the ill practices of the government. And Samuel Johnson, when he had written this poem, it was written anonymously, and it was a direct attack at the policies and laws made by the government. So Thales wants to bid London farewell, and he has decided that he is going to go to the shores of Cambria, and Wales is going to earn a Britain more. There is one person who is going to be added to Wales. The poet is his friend who is sorrowful because he is losing Thales, but he respects his choice. The poet continues and says, "For who would leave unbribed Hibernia's land, or change the rocks of Scotland for the Strand?" Now, you'll have to understand that Hibernia over here refers to Ireland, and Ireland, Scotland, England, and Wales together made up the United Kingdom. So, what he over here means to say is that it would be better to stay in Hibernia's land or in Ireland, or who would leave the rocks of Scotland in order to live in the Strand. Strand is actually the name of a street in the heart of London. He continues and says, "There are none, there none are swept by sudden fate away." So, in places different from London, people do not fall into degeneration. There none are swept by sudden fade away, but all whom hunger spares with age decay. Johnson is trying to make a commentary on the contemporary situation of London. There was hunger present over there, and with age, decay comes. So he says that in other places beside London, the decay comes with age, okay? But people who were living in London, they were plagued with other things. See the last two lines. Here, malice, rapine, accident conspire. Malice refers to bad intention, rapine refers to plunder, loot, and plunder, accident, conspiracy, and now a rabble rages, and now a fire. Rabble refers to a disorderly crowd. So, what he says is that London was plagued with various evils and vices of society like malice, rapine, accident, conspiracy. Their rabble rages at all times. Rabble refers to ruffians or people who loot other people or attack other people. And these were the reasons for sources of troubles. Line number 15 onwards reads, their ambush here relentless ruffians lay. In the last line also there was a mention of how a rabble raged. Here he mentions about ruffians. So on the streets of London there were violent men who were ready to attack innocent passerbys. Ambush refers to a surprise attack from a hidden position. So the streets of London were not safe anymore. And here the fell attorneys prowls for prey. But attorney refers to a kind of a lawyer. But the kind of lawyer that Johnson is talking about is a cruel or a crooked lawyer who are always looking out for their prey, prey, prey referring to a person who can become their victim. So they are looking for gullible people who will fall for their false promises. So men and the morality had gone down their drain. There were not good men present. People were always being attacked on the streets. That is what is being mentioned over here or referred to by the usage of the word ambush. And he simply calls the Londoners nothing less than as ruffians. Ruffians are those people who earn money by looting other people. He continues and says, here falling houses thunder on your head. There were housing problems. There was an increase in population. And the kind of infrastructure that was present in London was crumbling. The whole city was crumbling due to poverty. And here a female atheist talks you dead. Now, this particular line in the poem has a reference to a controversial female preacher who existed in the 1730s, and it was a kind of reaction that was present in the society due to the rise of this controversial female preacher. She was a female atheist. An atheist is a person who does not believe in God. So it is actually representative of degenerate modernity because people in general thought that for the sake of a woman's frailty, women were considered to be frail, and because for the sake of her frailty and her beauty alone, women need to be pious. So, women necessarily have to be pious or pure or be in touch with her religious or spiritual side so that she can have protection of a supernatural or a higher power over here, because women in general were considered to be frail and their beauty was something that needs to be protected. So the talk of a female atheist or the emergence of a woman who was an atheist or did not believe in God was quite a controversial thing that was happening in society. So these are some of the problems that the poet presents And these were the problems that Thales was running away from because he believed that the society was degenerating. The mention of falling houses that we see over here, it's actually no exaggeration, but it was one of the facts that people could see houses collapsing. So, this is the kind of reality of London presented by Johnson in these lines. In the next few lines, he says, while Thales waits for the very that contains of dissipated wealth, the small remains, on Thames's banks in silent thought we stood. So he mentions how Thales was waiting for the boat to arrive so that he can leave London, and he was waiting on the banks of River Thames. He further says, where Greenwich smiles upon the silver flood. Silver flood is referring to the River Thames, and Greenwich is actually the birthplace of Elizabeth, who was considered to be an opponent of Walpole. And this was the reason that the poet sees some hope with the birth of Elizabeth. He believed that with the coming of Elizabeth, a new hope had arisen in his heart, and he dreamt that a blissful age was about to start. So he says, where Greville smiles upon the silver flood, struck with the seed that gave Eliza birth, it was the birthplace of Elizabeth. We kneel and kiss the consecrated earth, in pleasing dreams the blissful age renew. So they still had hope in their heart that with the coming of Elizabeth, who was an opponent of Walpole, things were going to change. And call Britannia's glories back to view. He wanted England to regain the old glories that it once had. The current degeneration was in complete contrast with what England was in the past, and he hopes to bring back the old glories of the past time. Behold her cross triumphant on the main. Her cross refers to England's flag. So he wants England to reclaim its glory. The guard of commerce and the dread of Spain. He wanted that time to return when England was a land flourishing with commerce, and the enemies dreaded its presence. Masquerades debauched, excise oppressed. Refers to before. Masquerades refer to masks, which are used to hide the truth. All that glory that was once present has been lost, and uh, currently London was steeped in debauchery. This word debauched refers to debauchery, which means excessive indulgence in alcohol or pleasures of the flesh or drugs. He makes a direct attack on the policies or the situation of London, and he talks about the excise that had been put in place. Excise refers to excessive tax, which was a tool of oppression. It was a kind of hateful tax that was levied upon people, it was extorted from people, and was one of the reasons for the oppression that people were witnessing. So, this was what Thales wanted to escape from and was running away from. And he wanted to sail away from London, a place which had become morally corrupt. I'll end the lecture for today. We'll continue this in our next lecture. Thank you.